iPhone 14 Pro Max 1 year later. What is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. And take a look at this iPhone 14 Pro Max. Does that look old to you? Does it look a little bit dated? Well, maybe that's because you've seen it 1,000 times. Technically, this phone is not even 1 year old, but I think a lot of us are already itching to see what Apple's going to bring with the next version of the iPhone, and the iPhone 15 models, which is going to be coming next month. So be subscribed for that. I will be getting that ready for many comparisons, and probably through the next few months, you're going to be seeing a lot of showdowns between the upcoming 15s, including with the older iPhone, like the iPhone 14 Pro Max right here. But I want to talk about my experience with this phone that I've had for a full year. Now, it's not technically a full year, but I'm not going to have time next month. So this is going to stand as my 1 year video because I'm not going to cover this in its own review at that point. So 1 year later, when it comes to the phone call quality and stuff like that, and if you notice got the SOS, that's because right now I just simply switched to the iPhone 14 Plus as I'm giving it a little run to see how that phone performs a year later as well. So my SIM just got taken out of this. But I could tell you 1 year later with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the phone call quality has been very good. I haven't had any dropped calls. This is kind of, cool for an iPhone. I really always have had dropped calls on pretty much all the iPhones I've tried. But this one has been one that I don't really get many dropped calls on. 14 Pro, any of the 14s, they did pretty good here. However, I will say the bar strength did decrease versus like a Samsung phone. Like it did have like maybe one or two less bars in rural areas, but it never lost signal. So very good in this area. The audio was also pretty good out the bottom of the phone as well. So I enjoyed that. Speaking of the audio performance,
Nothing Phone 2 speed test. Let's begin with a boot up in 3, 2.
Now, this has been one of the loudest, the crispiest, the best sounding smartphones on the market.
Go and see which one can get there first. Now, we've covered the 14
in terms of the audio. Now, we do have the Dolby system on the Samsung phones. And while those sound good, I feel like the iPhone just has some of the best crisp audio at the highest level. There's been times when I really just don't even reach for my external speakers or anything like that because this phone just sounds so good. So I would just place it on the table and just hear it out, and it just really sounds good. So audio has been a really good thumbs up throughout the year. It definitely thumps for sure. So you probably don't always need an external speaker when you're rocking the 14 Pro Max. However, it's not going to get nearly as loud, but for a phone, it's definitely loud enough where you could share a video or watch a music video or just even hear some music with somebody nearby. It's definitely good enough to share. Now, Dynamic Island has been more than just timers, as you'll see right here. It's definitely been pretty decent for when people are calling. You hit the, answer button or the end button, stuff like that. But I've also noticed that it pops up with like certain sports things, Uber rides, things like that. There is many areas where software developers have added support for the Dynamic Island, but I got to tell you, this point, 1 year later, it's still a big blotch on the screen that is distracting, and I don't think it looks as pretty as some other phones. Here's a Nothing Phone 2, for example. Probably not the best example because most Android phones have this, but you'll see just a punch hole right there. And definitely, these phones that don't have Dynamic Islands, they look like you have more screen. So I still find this, pretty distracting. Well, it's not overly distracting, but just doesn't look as all screen. So while it is useful, you kind of forget about it after the honeymoon phase of getting this phone, or just the few weeks that you first get it. You'll get used to it, and then I just don't think it looks as good. There's no other way to put it. How else can I put it? It just doesn't look as good to me as a full screen, like something like the OnePlus 7 Pro that came out a few years ago with a pop-up camera, or even an under display camera. Just not my favorite look, but for some people, they're really going to enjoy the practicality of having, showing like sports scores and showing like, the call button up here and stuff. It is useful. It's fun, but I don't think it's the revolutionary feature that Apple made it out to be. It's decent though. eSIM, this sucks. I got to be honest with you. This goes for all the 14 models. Forcing the eSIM on US users was just ridiculous. And then, because I'm with T-Mobile, and then they kind of like, made it where it's kind of hard to switch between Android and iPhone. It's annoying. It just straight up is annoying. I know you got to just accept the changes if you're going to stick with the brand. But at the same time, listen, it's been a little bit annoying to switch between Android phones, so much so that I actually got a separate SIM card with a different carrier just so I can use my Android phones. And I mean, I know it's costing me a little extra, which is really annoying. But at the same time, not everybody's going to be able to do that. And I'm just not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of, you have to have an eSIM when every other carrier or every other phone maker still puts a SIM card slot on their phone. I really hope that other phone makers don't adopt this where you're just forced to use eSIM. We'll have to see how that goes. And I don't mean it like it sucks in the sense of like it's horrible, like it doesn't work. What I mean is that, and it does have some benefits, like you don't lose the SIM card. What I mean is if you like to switch phones, or especially you like to switch easily, or you get bored of a phone pretty quick and you want to trade in for another one, it just creates a new hassle that just didn't have to be there, creating complexity for no reason. So at this point, I would say, I'm not a super big fan of the eSIM. I could be old school with that, but I still prefer the regular SIM. But I think in the future, that's going to be kind of like, oh, who cares? Like nobody cares about that anymore. And everyone's just going to just accept the fact that that's how you use a phone, is with an eSIM. But for now, since we still have phones with SIM cards, it's kind of annoying to me. Moving on to the cameras, I got to say 1 year later, if I'm being honest, I love these cameras. If I think about any phone that I want to use for the top level cameras on a phone, I'm thinking Pro Max right here, S23 Ultra, maybe some of the Sony phones that are out there, the Xperia 1 Mark V. These are my top three I'm picking. And the iPhone I'm picking for a couple of reasons. Number one, it has a really good macro mode. So when you get really close to objects, you can get really, really close. And yes, I do realize we're taking a picture of an Android man in this video, but you could see that you can get really, really close on things here for this, iPhone. Also, more zoom than the regular iPhone. But it did definitely, honestly, was thinking a lot about switching to my Samsungs when I really wanted some more zoom. Even the Pixel going 30 times, 15 times is just weak for a phone at this price point. Apple really needs to get on board with more zoom. Like for real, Apple, like we're paying more sometimes, and we're paying less on Samsung phones, and we're getting way more zoom. This is just, I want better zoom. Let's just put it that way. In terms of the video though, I can't pick any other phone when it comes to video. Apple just has, Sony makes a sensor, but Apple just has a really good, focus on here. They have the software that makes it easy. And I just think it's a phone that gives you pro-like video without having to have pro skills, which is really cool because, not everybody wants to take the time. They just want to hop into their creativity. They just want to get on with the show, get on with their video making, and just get on with whatever they're doing. And then you add the action mode. And then for people who like, really stable video, you can do that now as well on the iPhone's camera. Cinematic to me is a cool party trick for most users, but if you're definitely a pro, you'll use that. But at the end of the day, portrait mode's improved. This whole camera is just well-rounded, besides the fact it doesn't have, the most zoom out there. Now, the front-facing camera is also very good, and it matches up very well with the rear. This has been the case over the past few years. However, I haven't seen any major changes from this since like the iPhone 12 Pro Max. So, it's great, but it's not like anything special that blew me away versus what I had previously experienced. And here are some samples I took right here. I'll just show you a few. You'll see very good colors, very natural looking as well. Doesn't oversaturate. Night mode is pretty solid on here as well. Look at the sky. Definitely gets objects pretty well. And you can still see good levels of detail even when it's laid out at nighttime. So definitely pretty good here. And then if we go through here, you'll just see overall the results are usually kind of really nice, kind of pro level almost. I still prefer having, a real camera around. That's why I still make videos on a real camera. But, iPhones are definitely good enough to replace most cameras these days. And this one was just very, very good with the results. The only issue I would say is that it wasn't quite as good at focusing as the iPhone 13 Pro Max, just because the 13 Pro Max had offered up a really good, focus. And with this one, the change in aperture and the new RAW modes and stuff like that, it really just made things, definitely a little bit I would say when you focus, a little bit more tricky for just average consumers. Sometimes they would think it's out of focus and stuff like that, but really you just had to find the minimal focus distance on the camera. And once you got that down, it was easy. So taking it on to the battery life. Now, this is an area where a lot of people complained. And let me tell you, I'm here to tell you that, many reviewers led you to believe that this phone is just really bad in battery life. It's not true. I've talked about how it's not as good as the 13 Pro Max, but I wasn't saying it's bad. This phone could still make it through a day easily. And there's some Android phones that still can't beat this phone in battery life. So don't believe everything you hear when they say, oh, this is worse and bad and blah. No, those people are really pushing the phone. The average person would not kill this phone in one day. It's just not happening. Now, if you are a heavy user, and if you're a heavy user, you're probably going to kill most phones. Yeah, you will drain this phone down. And is it as good as the 13 Pro Max in battery life? No, the answer is no, it's not. If we go over here to the low power mode, you'll get even further, but you'll have to deal with 60 hertz, which is not really a big deal because 60 hertz is still smooth on this phone due to iOS being very well optimized. I'll say this. The only time I really noticed this thing really drain a ton was when brightness was max enabled outdoors and I was doing heavy video work. Other than that, this phone never drained fully by the end of the day. I was finishing by the end of the day around 36%, 37% versus like 48, 47 on the 13 Pro Max. So it was like a 10% to 15% drop for the full day for me versus the 13 Pro Max, which is disappointing. But you traded for more brightness outside and you traded for, definitely a better camera on here. So you did get some improvements, but if you don't like that, just wait it out for the 15 Pro Max next month. They're going to have bigger batteries and it's going to last much longer. I'm pretty sure that's going to be one of the standout improvements on the 15 models. So I find that the iPhone 14 Pro Max, honestly, over a year has been really a nice, practical, flat display, but the design is not super comfortable to hold, mostly because this flat back with these corners is a little sharper than I would like. Nothing Phone 2 actually has a little bit of a curve on the back with a similar design. And then you combine that with the weight, and this is just kind of it just feels like a heavy brick that's not super comfortable to hold. Cases definitely help this phone feel more manageable and just better. But at the same time, this thing just feels like a brick. It's just heavy. And I really hope Apple goes with titanium like the rumors are pointing to lighten up the Pro models. The 14 Plus is actually much more comfortable to use. That's why I've been using it for the past couple of weeks over my 14 Pro Max, although I've still been updating the apps and playing around with this one. The 14 Pro Max, just not the most comfortable to hold. That's why you see me placing it down on the table a lot. I think over a long time, if you're a heavy user, you might even get aches in your hands, maybe in your wrists if you're using this thing all day. It's that, heavy and like cumbersome to hold. If you're putting it down, you're not a heavy user, you won't even notice. But we're getting into the details here, and I think this is an area Apple can improve, is making this phone lighter but still retaining the more premium feel with a little bit of smoother edges. So it just feels more like they nailed it when it comes to ergonomics. The iPhone 11 Pro Max was my favorite with this area. It was light enough, it was smooth, it felt amazing. So 1 year later, with the iPhone 14 Pro Max's display, we talked about its brightness, we talked about how good it looks when it comes to the photo quality and natural, but they nail it when it comes to the natural colors as well. So we don't really have an oversaturation on this panel, and it is like the most usable brightness. There is one con to that, or one thing about that though, is that the max brightness does, definitely trigger this thing where it gets too warm and then Apple actually dims the phone to protect the battery. I know it's a fail-safe feature. You don't want to damage your battery, but at the same time, it doesn't feel super premium when it's constantly dimming in warm weather because the brightness is too high, and then you got to wait like forever for the thing to cool down and get back to its normal brightness. There's been times where I actually had to restart this phone because it was so dim I couldn't see it. So that's super annoying. So you can't always take a full advantage of the full brightness, but when the phone's cooled down and when you're indoors, you can always use it, and it's incredibly bright. So I do like that. And I will say that, this phone has the smoothest animations, one of the smoothest displays out there with the 120 Hz ProMotion. I do find App Library doesn't look as smooth for some reason as like over here on the home screen. But overall, it's just very consistent and it's a great display. has this punch hole up here that definitely, well, punch hole, this dynamic island, which definitely digs into, as you can see right there, it definitely digs into what you're looking at sometimes, especially when you're watching video, if you're like in this landscape mode. But at the same time, you have probably like the highest quality, one of the highest quality displays out there. So definitely it's strong. It's definitely worth the money when it comes to the pure quality display. Now, from a performance standpoint, this phone does have the Apple A16 Bionic. That's clocked in at 3.46 gigahertz. The S23 Ultra beat this one in the speed test, and it's kind of weird because Apple always usually wins every speed test throughout the year. But this was just kind of an A15 all over again. And what I mean by that is not that it doesn't have the better benchmarks. I am aware that it does have better benchmarks. It is definitely the better performer when you get down to the technical specs. But in the reality is that, an A15 iPhone 13 Pro Max or 13 Pro performs exactly the same as the 14 Pro and Pro Max. So you didn't really gain much in performance. I think the A17 is going to be a bigger, brag when it comes to the performance improvements. But with iOS 17 not really giving you, again, no split screen, how are you taking advantage of it? Really, like, at the end of the day, what are you doing on an iPhone when all it does is have home screens, widgets, some applications one at a time? Like, how are you really taking advantage of this power? If you're watching this video, Apple, I feel like we need to go ahead and add ways where we take advantage of it, mostly via a split screen mode or something like that, where you would definitely notice that this phone can handle a lot more multitasking and stuff like that. At that point, I mean, we're just adding specs for the sake of adding specs. A16 hasn't really impressed me at all. It felt exactly like my phone last year. And besides 120 hertz, the 13 Pro Max actually felt just like the 12 Pro Max. All these phones have been performing like bosses, and it really hasn't changed my life at all. Having A16, A15, even A14, they've all been pretty much the same in terms of day-to-day experience for me. Now, software. It's simple, but I love it. I love iOS, and the reason I love iOS is because it's so simple, in fact, and you could call it boring, call it what you will, but they have some of the best apps on the market today. Period. Point blank, they are some of the best applications out there, some of the best, most well-developed applications out there. You just can't get around that. Developers spend more time creating, a lot more time creating great applications for, a lot of them do, for iPhone. The widgets are clean, and I think a lot of cases they look better than the Android widgets. And the phone, I think, just works so well and is so easy to use that once you get used to it, there's not really that much to think about with this phone. And that's really good because while it is boring to some people, that's actually a good thing. It's a sign of maturity for this product. It's a sign that this product has gotten so good that it's a product that you're never going to want to give up. It's a product that you are just going to have in the background of your life. And it kind of just reminds you of like your shoes or your clothing. You grab your wallet, your keys, you put on your shoes, you put on your clothes, and you head out the door, you grab your iPhone. It kind of feels like that. It's just there. It just works. It's easy. You don't really think about it and get on with your life. And that's not something you could say about every other phone. I feel like when I'm playing around with an Android phone, for example, I want to play around with the glyph. I want to play around with stuff. I want to customize stuff. And my brain is just thinking about it. This one, my brain doesn't really think about it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take some photos and I'm out of here. I don't know how to describe it. It's something that you just know when you have this, when you have an iPhone. It just kind of just works and you just kind of forget about it. I think the closest Android phone to that is the Pixel. The Pixel's kind of like that too. They don't got too much going on and it's just very simple and smooth. So when you can nail those things, you have a great product because then the person don't have to like spend all their time on their phone unless they want to. And if you want to, that's why Samsung exists, because Samsung has everything you want in the kitchen sink. But for this, software has been great. Updates come in consistently. We've even been getting rapid security responses, which really help out the experience, I think, on an iPhone, because what it does is that when some bad security flaw comes out, then Apple will go ahead and just push out that update really quickly for you. So it's a really good thing to have that as well. Is really good. And the ecosystem is obviously still a draw. You have the iPad, the AirPods Max, Apple Watch, all that stuff is still a draw. It's kind of something that I think Apple's getting comfortable with. They know they got their ecosystem, so they're kind of just relying on that to keep people there. But they do improve those products, like the AirPods get better, the iPads get better, and they just all really work seamlessly together. A lot of other brands are starting to get that down pack too, where their AirPods and their headphones and everything works very well together as well. They took a page out of Apple's book with that one. But Apple's products still do that as well, and they're kind of the ones who started all that. So definitely that's still a draw. Another thing that's a draw is brand perception. Believe it or not, you just can't get over the fruit sign, the Apple logo. People are going to buy this phone just because of that. It's just like, Nike or some other, major brands out there. People are just going to buy the brand because the brand. They're just going to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. People like, the brands they like. And Apple's got that brand perception nailed down where you feel like you just got to have an iPhone. And I feel like, unlike other brands, this is one of those phones that the majority of the public, especially here in the US, just feels like they got to have. And with that, Apple knows they ain't going to have no problems with sales of these phones, even going forward in the next iPhone. They talk about the sales have dipped in this past quarter for iPhone. Well, of course. Why do you think that is? Because everybody and their brother is waiting for the iPhone 15 models. And when those come out, you're going to see sold out in maybe 6 minutes, 7 minutes. And now you got to wait 3 weeks. Watch, you'll see. End of the day, I'm giving this phone an 8 out of 10. Almost dropped it. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. The reason why is because it didn't dramatically improve my experience over iPhone 12 Pro Max or 13 Pro Max. It's a dramatically better spec'd out phone for sure. But the actual feel, the body, the phone itself, it's just a more refined version. And Space Black was neat. I was really hyped about this Space Black, and I do still think it's sleek and really good. I wish the back was black. This Space Gray right here. Did I say Space Black? I don't even know if that's the name of this phone's color. It probably is, but it has like a gray back here with a black side. I like the sides. I wish the back was fully black too, though. But that was pretty cool just to have a different color. At the end of the day, my excitement quickly waned with this phone. I enjoyed comparing it to a bunch of other phones because I always think it's the benchmark, especially here in the US. But definitely, it's been a really solid iPhone. I can see why people are starting to get bored with the iPhone experience. The competitors are really exciting by comparison. And that's mostly because Apple's launch cycle too takes a whole year. So there's a lot of time for other phones to come out and just kind of take your attention away. But at the end of the day, I feel like the biggest launch always comes in September with the new iPhones. That's the launch everybody waits for. And so at the end of the day, I feel like they still have one of the strongest phones out there. And I do really love this iPhone 14 Pro Max as well. Although I'm definitely itching for an upgrade. And the reason why is not because I need to upgrade my phone every year. It's because I'm looking for more changes in the iPhone experience. It's been pretty similar. Dynamic Island was different, but it really didn't push the envelope for me. I thought it would, but it didn't. I think having a periscope camera on here, maybe titanium, I feel like it's going to feel like an all different phone with the iPhone 14 or 15 Pro Max. I really hope it does. And I'm really excited for iPhone 16, which is probably going to be a total redesign. We'll have to see what happens next year. So you'll want to be subscribed for those upcoming videos. If you found this video helpful, entertaining, informing, do me a favor, click the like button for me. And if you've had the 14 Pro or 14 Pro Max, let me know your experience with that. And if you had the iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max, let me know your experience that you've had all year, what you've learned, everything about that down below in the comments section. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.